The ancient crystal hummed with forgotten power as Dr. Thane Korath carefully extracted it from the rubble. 3 months of digging through the ruins of Velas 9 had yielded nothing but broken pottery and corroded metal. Now, deep in what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber, he had found something that made his 4 hearts race with excitement. The crystal was unlike anything in the galactic databases. Its surface rippled with patterns that seemed to shift when he looked directly at them. As the dig team's archaeological scanner connected to the artifact, holographic symbols began flowing through the air like living things. The translation matrix worked frantically to decode the ancient script. "Dr. Korath," his assistant Nix called from across the chamber. "The symbols are coming through clearly now. This appears to be some kind of warning system." Korath approached the floating display with growing curiosity. The Vela civilization had vanished over 200,000 years ago, leaving behind only empty cities and mysterious ruins. Any intact records from that era were priceless to the galactic archaeological community. The first translated phrase made him pause, then the second made him step backward in confusion. By the third line, his excitement had turned to cold dread. "Beware the children of Keth Marai," the ancient text read. "The forge of nightmares sleeps, but its spawn may yet wake. Should the endless devourers return, may the gods grant us swift extinction before they notice our worlds." Korath checked the translation 3 times before accepting what he was seeing. The coordinates embedded in the crystal pointed to a small blue planet in the Outer Rim territories, a world the Galactic Council knew very well, a world called Earth. For the next several hours, Korath and his team worked in tense silence to extract every piece of information from the crystal. The ancient Velas records painted a picture of absolute terror. They described beings who fell from the stars like a plague, consuming entire civilizations not for resources or territory, but seemingly for the joy of conquest itself. The records spoke of creatures who could survive in any environment, who learned from every defeat, and who treated pain as a teacher rather than an enemy. Most disturbing were the accounts of their psychological warfare. The Velas texts described how these beings would study their enemies, learn their deepest fears, and then use that knowledge to break them completely before the killing began. "Doctor," Nick said quietly, "these coordinates match Earth exactly, but that cannot be correct. Humans are peaceful. They have been model citizens since joining the Council 10 years ago." Korath stared at the holographic display showing a perfect match between the ancient coordinates and Earth's current position. He thought about Ambassador Tom Blake, who had visited their university just last month to discuss cultural exchange programs. Blake had seemed genuinely interested in archaeological methods and had even suggested joint expeditions to study human history. The irony was not lost on him. Here he was, discovering that humanity's homeworld was known to the ancients as the Forge of Nightmares, while humans themselves appeared to have no knowledge of this legacy. Either the records were wrong, or humanity had somehow forgotten their own terrifying past. That evening, Korath sat in his temporary shelter reviewing the day's findings. The crystal had revealed more than just warnings about Earth. There were tactical analyses of human fighting methods, psychological profiles of their leadership structures, and detailed accounts of their technological adaptation abilities. The ancients had clearly studied humanity extensively, and everything they learned had filled them with horror. One passage particularly disturbed him. It described how humans could turn any disadvantage into a strength, how they thrived under pressure that would break other species, and how they possessed an instinctive understanding of weaknesses in their opponents. The text concluded with a chilling observation that humans seemed to enjoy the challenge of impossible odds. Korath thought about the humans he had met during his career. They were always polite, always helpful, always quick to offer assistance or share knowledge. They had integrated seamlessly into galactic society, contributing innovative solutions to problems that had puzzled other species for generations. Their creativity was legendary, their diplomatic skills impressive, and their scientific achievements remarkable. But now, reading these ancient warnings, he began to see those same traits in a different light. Human creativity could easily be repurposed for destruction. Their diplomatic skills suggested an intuitive understanding of psychological manipulation. Their scientific achievements showed a talent for breaking down complex problems into manageable components, a skill that would serve them well in warfare. The next morning brought an urgent message from his research partner on the nearby world of Thessar 4. Dr. Mira Stones had been excavating a completely different ancient site, one belonging to the extinct Mordai civilization. Her message was brief but alarming. Thane, I need you to see this immediately. We found similar crystals here with identical warnings about something called Keth Morai. The coordinates are the same. How is this possible? Within days, reports began flooding in from archaeological sites across the galaxy. The same warnings, the same coordinates, the same terrifying descriptions of the endless devourers. Civilizations that had never had contact with each other, separated by thousands of light years and tens of thousands of years, all carried identical warnings about Earth. Korath realized he was looking at evidence of the galaxy's greatest nightmare made real. Somewhere in humanity's past lay a legacy of destruction so complete that civilizations across the galaxy had independently decided to warn future generations about Earth and its inhabitants. The question that kept him awake at night was simple, but terrifying. If humans truly were descendants of the endless devourers, what had caused them to become peaceful? And more importantly, what might cause that peace to end? As he prepared his report for the council, Korath made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The truth was too dangerous to reveal publicly, too terrifying to ignore, and too important to mishandle. He would present his findings directly to Council Archon Voss, and let the leaders of galactic civilization decide humanity's fate. The crystal continued to hum softly on his desk, its ancient warnings pulsing with ethereal light, as if eager to share its terrible secrets with anyone willing to listen. Rain drummed against the windows of the secure facility on Proxima Station as Dr. Nina Cross reviewed the most disturbing psychological profile she had ever compiled. For 3 weeks, she had been analyzing human behavioral patterns under the direct orders of Council Archon Voss, and every piece of data she uncovered made her more uncomfortable with the species she had once considered admirably peaceful. General Hawk paced behind her desk like a caged predator, his own anxiety matching hers. The military strategist had been conducting parallel research into human tactical thinking, and his findings painted an equally troubling picture. Together, they had been tasked with determining whether Dr. Korath's archaeological discoveries represented a real threat to galactic security. "Show me the stress response analysis again," Hawk said, pausing to study the holographic displays floating above Cross's desk. Cross manipulated the data with practiced efficiency. The results showed human physiological responses to various crisis scenarios compiled from medical records, emergency response data, and psychological evaluations. What they revealed was deeply unsettling. "Notice how human stress hormones don't follow the standard fight-or-flight pattern," she explained. "Most species show elevated stress markers that peak quickly and then decline as they either engage or retreat. Humans are different. Their stress response actually improves their cognitive function and physical performance. They literally become smarter and stronger when threatened." Hawk studied the graphs with growing concern. His own species, the reptilian corv, were considered among the galaxy's fiercest warriors, but even they showed predictable stress patterns. Humans seemed to have evolved stress as a tactical advantage rather than a survival warning. "What about their pain tolerance?" he asked. Cross pulled up another set of data, this one compiled from human medical procedures and injury reports. The results were equally disturbing. Humans could function with injuries that would incapacitate most other species. More troubling was their psychological response to pain, which seemed to trigger increased aggression rather than withdrawal. "They don't just tolerate pain," Cross said quietly. "They use it as information." Human medical records show numerous cases of individuals performing complex tasks while suffering from what should be debilitating injuries. They treat their bodies like expendable resources in service of their objectives. The investigation had begun as a simple fact-finding mission, but as weeks passed, it had become an exercise in mounting horror. Every aspect of human psychology and physiology seemed designed for warfare and survival in hostile environments. Their social structures, their recreational activities, their problem-solving methods, even their artistic expressions, all pointed to a species shaped by constant conflict. Hawk had been particularly disturbed by human military history. Unlike other species who generally developed warfare as a response to external threats, humans appeared to have been fighting each other continuously throughout their recorded history. But what made it worse was their approach to conflict. They didn't just fight to win, they fought to learn. "Look at this pattern," he said, activating his own displays. Human military technology doesn't follow the standard development curve. Most species develop weapons, use them for a period, and then gradually improve them through incremental changes. Humans develop weapons, use them once or twice, then completely reinvent their entire approach based on what they learned. Cross nodded grimly. She had noticed similar patterns in human civilian technology. They approached every problem as if it were an enemy to be defeated, breaking it down into components, analyzing weaknesses, and then developing solutions that were often far more complex than necessary. What other species saw as elegantly simple solutions, humans seemed to view as missed opportunities for innovation. The psychological profiles were perhaps the most disturbing aspect of their research. Human entertainment consistently involved conflict scenarios. Their games simulated warfare, their sports involved controlled violence, and their fiction celebrated individuals who overcame impossible odds through determination and tactical thinking. Even their children's activities were essentially training exercises for strategic thinking and competitive dominance. "I've been analyzing human diplomatic records," Cross said, pulling up a new set of files. "Their negotiation techniques are remarkably sophisticated, but they all follow military tactical principles. They gather intelligence about their opponents, identify psychological pressure points, and then systematically exploit weaknesses while concealing their own capabilities." What made this particularly unsettling was that humans seemed to do this instinctively. Ambassador Blake had never received formal military training, yet his diplomatic style showed clear evidence of strategic thinking that would impress career military officers from other species. The research team had also discovered something they were calling the human escalation factor. When faced with setbacks or challenges, most species would reassess their capabilities and adjust their goals accordingly. Humans seemed to do the opposite. Failure or opposition triggered increased commitment and more creative approaches to achieving their objectives. "They don't just adapt to hostile environments," Cross explained to Hawk during one of their daily briefings. "They reshape hostile environments to serve their purposes. Human colony reports show them thriving on worlds that other species consider barely habitable. They don't terraform planets so much as they terraform themselves to match planetary conditions." The implications were staggering. If humans were indeed descendants of the species described in the ancient warnings, then their current peaceful behavior might simply represent an adaptation to current conditions. Remove the stability of galactic civilization, present them with a genuine existential threat, or simply give them a compelling reason to compete for resources, and they might revert to their ancestral patterns. Hawk had been running tactical simulations based on human behavioral patterns, and the results kept him awake at night. Human strategic thinking was unlike anything in the galactic military databases. They seemed to approach every scenario as if defeat was not an option, systematically identifying and eliminating obstacles until victory was achieved. "The most terrifying thing," he confided to Cross, "is that they don't seem to have any concept of acceptable losses. Other species will withdraw when casualties reach a certain threshold. Humans calculate losses as investments toward achieving objectives. They'll sacrifice anything if they believe it brings them closer to victory." As their investigation neared completion, both Cross and Hawk realized they faced an impossible situation. The evidence clearly suggested that humans represented a potential threat to galactic stability, but taking action against them might trigger the very aggressive response they were trying to prevent. Humans had shown themselves to be peaceful and cooperative under current conditions, but those conditions might be the only thing preventing them from reverting to their ancestral nature. The final report they prepared for Archon Voss was a masterpiece of diplomatic language wrapped around a core of barely contained terror. They recommended continued monitoring and gradual integration policies, while secretly advising the development of contingency plans for the day humanity's true nature might reassert itself. Neither of them slept well after submitting their findings, knowing they had just handed galactic leadership the most dangerous intelligence briefing in recorded history. The emergency transmission from the archaeological site on Kepler 186f arrived during Beck's morning routine, shattering what he had hoped would be a peaceful day in the galactic archives. As the Council's chief historian, he had grown accustomed to urgent requests for historical data. But the tone of desperation in Dr. Vale's message suggested something far more serious than a typical academic inquiry. Beck, we need immediate access to all records from the Great Silence period. Vale's holographic image flickered with transmission interference. We found another site with warnings about Kethmarai, but these are different. These are battle reports. Beck's methodical nature had served him well during 40 years of archival work, but even he felt a chill at those words. The Great Silence represented the most mysterious period in galactic history, a time when dozens of advanced civilizations had simply vanished without explanation. Most historians treated it as an unsolved puzzle, interesting but ultimately academic. Now it seemed the mystery might have a terrifying solution. He made his way through the massive underground complex that housed the galactic archives, past countless rows of data crystals containing the recorded history of hundreds of species. The Great Silence files occupied an entire wing, their sheer volume a testament to how thoroughly civilizations had documented their own disappearance. The first reports Beck accessed came from the Thylan Confederacy, a militant species that had controlled 12 star systems before vanishing almost exactly 200,000 years ago. Their final transmission spoke of an enemy unlike anything in their military databases, beings who seemed to learn and adapt faster than any biological species should be capable of. Enemy forces demonstrate impossible tactical flexibility. Read one Thylan battle report. Standard defensive measures prove ineffective as hostiles modify their approach in real time. Recommend immediate evacuation of outer colonies. Beck cross-referenced the dates with Dr. Korath's archaeological timeline. The correlations were perfect. The Great Silence had begun just as early humans were developing on Earth, and it had spread across the galaxy in a pattern that suggested systematic conquest rather than natural disaster. As he delved deeper into the archives, Beck began to piece together a horrifying picture. The vanished civilizations had left behind remarkably consistent descriptions of their destroyers, fast-adapting bipedal creatures who used captured technology more effectively than its original creators, warriors who seemed to thrive on adversity and become more dangerous as situations became more desperate. The Nexus Coalition files contained the most detailed accounts, including tactical analyses that made Beck's stomach turn. The enemy had apparently studied each species extensively before attacking, identifying not just military weaknesses, but psychological and cultural vulnerabilities as well. They didn't simply defeat their opponents, they broke them so completely that surrender became preferable to continued resistance. Subject species demonstrates advanced pattern recognition and strategic learning capabilities, one Nexus analyst had written. They appear to treat each engagement as a learning experience, incorporating successful enemy tactics into their own methodology within days of exposure. Recommend avoiding prolonged conflict as enemy capabilities increase exponentially with experience. Beck found similar warnings in the archives of 17 different civilizations, all describing the same adaptive learning behavior, the same tactical flexibility, the same psychological warfare techniques. The consistency was undeniable, and the implications were terrifying. The historical pattern became clearer as Beck expanded his search parameters. The Great Silence hadn't been a single catastrophic event. It had been a systematic campaign lasting thousands of years as an unknown enemy had moved methodically through galactic civilization, studying and conquering each species before moving on to the next target. What made the records particularly disturbing was their description of the enemies' apparent motivations. Unlike typical conquerors who sought resources or territory, these beings seemed driven by something more complex. They would completely strip conquered worlds of technology and knowledge, but then abandon them rather than establish permanent settlements. Enemy behavior suggests they value information and experience over material gains, one Zephyrian military analyst had concluded. They appear to be testing themselves against increasingly difficult opponents, treating warfare as a form of education or entertainment. Beck discovered that several civilizations had actually attempted to negotiate with their attackers, offering tribute or submission in exchange for survival. In every case, the enemy had accepted the surrender long enough to study the species thoroughly, then had proceeded with complete extermination anyway. The pattern suggested beings who saw other species as learning opportunities rather than potential allies or subjects. The most chilling discovery came from the archives of the Ethereal Collective, a highly advanced species that had achieved near-godlike technological capabilities before their disappearance. Their final records contained detailed psychological profiles of individual enemy leaders, and the descriptions matched human behavioral patterns with unsettling precision. Subject demonstrates classical pack-hunting instincts combined with individual cunning that exceeds our predictive models, read one ethereal analysis. Shows no fear response to superior numbers or technology. Appears to view disadvantageous situations as tactical puzzles to be solved, rather than threats to be avoided. Beck realized he was looking at humanity's ancestral legacy, written in the blood of extinct civilizations. The beings described in these ancient records possessed every trait that Dr. Cross and General Hawk had identified in modern humans, but amplified to a terrifying degree. They were humanity's ancestors, and they had systematically destroyed galactic civilization before mysteriously disappearing. The question that haunted Beck was what had happened to them. The records showed their campaign of conquest continuing for thousands of years, then suddenly ending. There were no accounts of their defeat, no descriptions of their retreat. They had simply vanished as completely as the civilizations they had destroyed. As he compiled his research, Beck began to suspect the answer. The timing suggested that humanity's ancestors had left the galaxy not because they were defeated, but because they had run out of opponents. They had consumed galactic civilization so thoroughly that nothing remained to challenge them, and they had moved on to seek new experiences elsewhere. The implications for modern galactic society were staggering. If humans were indeed descendants of these cosmic destroyers, then their current peaceful behavior represented either evolutionary development beyond their origins, or simply dormancy in the absence of worthy challenges. The archaeological evidence suggested that Earth had been chosen as a refuge world, a place where the species could rest and recover between campaigns. Beck's final report to the Council painted the darkest picture in galactic history. Humanity wasn't just descended from a warrior species. They were the children of beings who had treated the annihilation of civilizations as a form of recreational education. The peace that had allowed galactic civilization to rebuild over the past 200,000 years existed only because humanity's ancestors had grown bored with easy victories and had withdrawn to Earth to wait for more interesting challenges to emerge. As he sealed his report and prepared for transmission to Council Archon Voss, Beck couldn't shake the feeling that by uncovering this truth, galactic civilization might have just provided humanity with exactly the kind of challenge their ancestors had been waiting for. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the deepest levels of the Central Nexus, far from the public galleries and media feeds that normally broadcast their proceedings. Archon Voss had called for absolute secrecy, and the chamber's advanced shielding ensured that not even quantum surveillance could penetrate their discussions. The weight of what they were about to discuss demanded nothing less than complete confidentiality. Representatives from 47 species filled the circular chamber, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. But today, their differences seemed insignificant compared to the shared terror that had brought them together. The evidence compiled by Dr. Korath, General Hawk, Dr. Cross, and historian Beck painted a picture so disturbing that several council members had initially refused to believe it. Voss activated the central display, and holographic images filled the chamber. Ancient warnings, tactical analyses, psychological profiles, and historical records all pointed to the same impossible conclusion. Humanity, the species they had welcomed as peaceful newcomers to galactic civilization, was descended from the beings responsible for the Great Silence, the most devastating period in galactic history. "The evidence is undeniable," Voss announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "What we face today is not a diplomatic crisis or a military threat in the traditional sense. We are confronting the possibility that we have been harboring the descendants of our civilization's greatest nightmare." Prime Minister Reed of the Altarian Federation was the first to speak, his blue-scaled features flushed with agitation. "The solution is obvious. We must establish immediate quarantine protocols around human space, isolate them before they remember what they are. And trigger exactly the response we're trying to prevent?" Dr. Cross interjected from the expert witness section. "My psychological analysis indicates that humans respond to perceived threats with increased aggression and tactical innovation. Hostile action could awaken the very instincts we're trying to keep dormant." Fleet Commander Zarn of the militant hegemony disagreed. "Better to strike while they remain unaware of their true nature. My strategic analysis indicates that a coordinated assault could eliminate the threat before it fully manifests." The chamber erupted in heated debate. Some species favored immediate military action, others pushed for diplomatic isolation, and a few argued for maintaining the status quo while secretly preparing for the worst. But underlying every argument was the same fundamental fear. Humanity might remember what they had once been, and if that happened, galactic civilization would face the same fate as their predecessors. Senator Williams of the Pacifica Coalition raised a trembling appendage for attention. "Has anyone considered the possibility that humanity has genuinely evolved beyond their ancestral nature? They have been model galactic citizens for 10 years. Their contributions to science, diplomacy, and culture have been remarkable. Their contributions follow the same pattern as their ancestors," Historian Beck replied grimly. "Advanced problem-solving abilities, innovative thinking, and intuitive understanding of complex systems. The same traits that made their ancestors such effective conquerors make modern humans valuable allies. The question is whether those traits serve peaceful purposes only in the absence of genuine challenges." General Hawk presented his tactical analysis, and the result sent new waves of fear through the assembly. Human strategic thinking was unlike anything in the galactic military databases. They approached every problem as if failure was unacceptable, systematically identifying and eliminating obstacles until victory was achieved. Their recreational activities, their entertainment, even their children's games, all involved competitive scenarios that would serve as excellent military training. "The most disturbing aspect," Hawk explained, "is their escalation factor. When other species encounter setbacks, they reassess and adjust their goals. Humans seem to interpret setbacks as challenges to overcome through increased effort and creative tactics. They don't just adapt to adversity, they use it as motivation for innovation." The debate continued for hours, with each species bringing their own perspectives and fears to the discussion. The Crystalline Collective, whose ancestors had survived the Great Silence by fleeing to the galactic rim, advocated for complete evacuation of systems near human space. The Machine Intelligence Network calculated probability matrices that showed human aggression as statistically inevitable, given sufficient provocation. Archon Voss struggled to maintain order as the session devolved into increasingly desperate proposals. Some representatives suggested biological warfare, others recommended economic sanctions, and a few even proposed revealing the truth to humanity in hopes that self-knowledge would prevent regression to ancestral behaviors. "All of our options are fundamentally flawed," Dr. Cross observed during a brief recess. "Military action risks triggering the exact response we're trying to prevent. Isolation tactics might be interpreted as challenges to overcome. Even revealing the truth could awaken dormant instincts by providing a framework for understanding their true capabilities." The psychological dynamics were indeed complex. Humans had shown remarkable adaptability and cooperative instincts under peaceful conditions, but their entire evolutionary history suggested these were survival mechanisms rather than fundamental character traits. Remove the conditions that made cooperation advantageous, and they might revert to their ancestral patterns with terrifying efficiency. As the session resumed, a new voice entered the debate. Ambassador Keller of the Synthetic Collective had remained silent throughout the earlier discussions, but now his artificial intelligence perspective offered unique insights. The evidence suggests that humanity's peaceful behavior is conditional rather than evolutionary, Keller stated. Their current cooperation serves their interests within existing galactic power structures. But humans excel at recognizing when circumstances change and adapting their strategies accordingly. If they perceive shifts in the galactic balance of power, they may recalculate their optimal behavioral patterns. The implications were staggering. Humanity's peace might be nothing more than an extended tactical decision, maintained only as long as cooperation served their interests better than conflict. If they ever decided that aggression offered better outcomes, their transition from allies to existential threats could happen with shocking speed. The final hours of the emergency session focused on damage control and contingency planning. The Council established several secret protocols for monitoring human activities, developing early warning systems for signs of behavioral changes, and preparing response strategies for various crisis scenarios. But every plan they developed seemed inadequate against an enemy that had once systematically destroyed galactic civilization. As the session concluded, Archon Voss made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The truth would remain classified at the highest levels, shared only with essential security personnel and key military leaders. Humanity would continue to be treated as valued allies while secret preparations were made for the day their true nature might reassert itself. The assembled representatives departed with the weight of terrible knowledge, knowing they had just spent 12 hours debating how to manage their civilization's potential executioners. Outside the chamber, galactic life continued normally, unaware that their leaders now viewed humanity's peaceful smiles and helpful cooperation through the lens of barely contained terror. In the depths of his private office, Archon Voss stared at classified reports describing human achievements in science, diplomacy, and culture, wondering if he was looking at the innocent contributions of evolved beings or the patient preparations of dormant predators. The broadcast was supposed to be a routine archaeological update, the kind of educational programming that filled the galaxy's cultural networks during off-peak hours. Dr. Morris Webb had been documenting his team's excavation of Thesser 7 for the past month, sharing their discoveries of ancient Mordai artifacts with academic audiences across known space. He had no way of knowing that his casual commentary would trigger the greatest crisis in modern galactic history. "These pictographs are fascinating," Webb said to his camera drone as it hovered over a newly uncovered stone wall. "The artistic style suggests they're warnings or religious instructions of some kind. Look at these humanoid figures here, and these symbols that seem to represent death or destruction." The images were broadcast live across 17 star systems before anyone realized what they were seeing. Ancient stone carvings showing unmistakably human silhouettes surrounded by symbols for conquest, death, and endless hunger. The pictographs were identical to warnings found on dozens of other worlds, all pointing to Earth as the source of galactic civilization's greatest nightmare. Within minutes, the broadcast had been cut and the footage classified, but the damage was already done. Screenshots and recordings spread through the galactic network like wildfire, shared by confused viewers who couldn't understand why such innocuous archaeological footage had triggered emergency broadcast protocols. Ambassador Tom Blake was in his office on Unity Station, reviewing trade agreements with the Centaurian Republic, when his communication system erupted with urgent messages, emergency recall orders from Earth, frantic queries from allied species, and most disturbing of all, a formal summons to appear before the full Galactic Council within 24 hours. The summons carried the highest security classifications and diplomatic priority codes that Blake had never seen used before. Whatever had happened, it was serious enough to trigger protocols reserved for existential threats to galactic civilization. He began preparing for immediate departure, while his staff worked frantically to determine what crisis had erupted. Journey to the council chambers on Central Nexus normally took 18 hours, but military escorts and priority routing cut the travel time in half. Blake spent the trip reviewing every possible diplomatic crisis that might warrant such urgent attention, but nothing in his experience suggested what he was about to face. The council chamber was arranged differently than Blake had ever seen it. Instead of the normal semicircular seating that encouraged open debate, representatives were positioned in a full circle around a single chair, clearly intended for him. The arrangement felt less like a diplomatic meeting and more like a trial. Archon, Voss looked like he had aged years in the past few days. His normally composed demeanor showed cracks of stress and uncertainty that Blake found deeply unsettling. When Voss activated the chamber's security systems, sealing them from any outside communication or observation, Blake knew he was about to learn something that would change everything. Ambassador Blake, Voss began carefully, what I am about to share with you will be difficult to accept, but I need you to understand that we have verified this information through multiple independent sources. The holographic displays activated around the chamber, filling the space with images that Blake initially couldn't understand. Ancient warnings in dead languages, archaeological evidence from ruins across the galaxy, tactical analyses, and psychological profiles. As the presentation continued, a horrifying picture emerged. Earth was not humanity's birthplace. It was their prison. The beings humans called their ancestors had systematically destroyed galactic civilization 200,000 years ago, consuming entire species in a campaign of conquest that had lasted millennia. They had been known to the ancients as the endless devourers, beings who treated warfare as education and extinction as entertainment. Blake listened in stunned silence as the evidence accumulated. Human behavioral patterns, strategic thinking, stress responses, and social structures all matched historical records of the galaxy's most terrifying predators. The peace that had allowed galactic civilization to rebuild existed only because humanity's ancestors had grown bored with easy victories and had withdrawn to Earth to wait for more challenging opponents. This is impossible, Blake finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Humans are peaceful. We've contributed to galactic civilization for 10 years without any aggressive incidents. Your peace may be conditional rather than evolutionary, Dr. Cross replied from the expert witness section. Our analysis suggests that human behavior is an adaptive response to current conditions rather than a fundamental character change. The implications hit Blake like a physical blow. Everything he had worked for, every alliance he had built, every friendship he had formed among other species had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. Worse, the revelation of this truth might trigger the very aggression that everyone feared. General Hawk presented tactical analyses, showing how quickly peaceful human activities could be converted to military purposes. Colony ships could become invasion fleets, trade networks could become supply chains for conquest, and diplomatic missions could become intelligence-gathering operations. The infrastructure for galactic domination was already in place, waiting only for the decision to use it. What happens now? Blake asked, though he dreaded the answer. That depends largely on how humanity responds to learning their true nature, Archon Voss replied. We hope that knowledge will lead to conscious choices to remain peaceful. We fear that it might awaken instincts that have remained dormant for 200,000 years. The meeting continued for hours, with Blake learning the full scope of galactic civilization's terror. Species were already altering trade routes to avoid human space. Diplomatic missions were being quietly withdrawn. Some governments were developing contingency plans for the day humans reverted to type. Most disturbing of all was the realization that the galaxy's reaction might become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If humanity felt threatened or isolated, their ancestral instincts might indeed awaken. The very fear of human aggression could trigger the aggression that everyone was trying to prevent. Blake returned to Earth carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. As his transport approached humanity's homeworld, he found himself seeing everything differently. The orbital shipyards that he had once viewed as symbols of peaceful expansion now looked like potential military assets. The research stations that had contributed so much to galactic science could easily be converted to weapons development. Even the children playing in Earth's parks seemed different when viewed through the lens of their ancestral legacy. The news was already spreading. through human space by the time Blake arrived. Archaeological broadcasts, leaked diplomatic communications, and rumors from alien contacts had created a storm of confusion and speculation. Humanity was learning that they were descended from the galaxy's greatest monsters, and the psychological impact was immediate and profound. Military recruitment centers reported massive increases in applications. Archaeological expeditions to trace humanity's origins became urgent priorities funded by emergency government allocations. Most troubling of all, human colonization efforts shifted from peaceful settlement patterns to strategic positioning that would control key trade routes and resource systems. Blake found himself in the impossible position of trying to manage humanity's reaction, while knowing that every decision could trigger the apocalyptic scenario everyone feared. He issued carefully worded statements about the importance of peaceful coexistence, but he could see the change beginning in human eyes. The casual confidence was hardening into something more focused and purposeful. The final confirmation of galactic fears came during a routine Colonial Council meeting on New Geneva. When representatives from allied species expressed concerns about human expansion plans, Colony Administrator James Stone replied with words that chilled Blake to his core. "Perhaps it's time our neighbors remembered who they're dealing with," Stone said quietly. "We've been generous and accommodating for 10 years, but generosity shouldn't be mistaken for weakness." Blake realized that humanity was waking up, and the galaxy had just provided them with exactly the kind of challenge their ancestors had found irresistible. The age of human peace was ending, and what came next would determine whether galactic civilization could survive the awakening of the species that had once been known as the Forge of Nightmares. In the depths of space, human ships began changing course toward strategic positions, while their crews smiled the same peaceful smiles that had once reassured the galaxy. But now those smiles carried a different meaning, and anyone who understood humanity's true heritage would recognize them for what they had always been. The smiles of apex predators who had finally remembered what they were born to hunt. As Blake stood in his office looking out at Earth's blue oceans and white clouds, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing the end of one age and the beginning of another. Humanity had spent 200,000 years in peaceful slumber, but the galaxy's fear had provided them with the wake-up call their ancestral instincts had been waiting for. The question that would determine the fate of galactic civilization was simple, but terrifying. Now that humanity remembered they were descended from the endless devourers, would they choose to remain the peaceful species they had become? Or would they reclaim the legacy that had once made the stars themselves tremble in fear? Blake suspected. He already knew the answer, and that knowledge filled him with a mixture of pride and horror that he would carry for the rest of his life. Humanity was coming home to itself, and the galaxy would never be the same again.